Так, следующий доклад нам расскажет Камиль Исламов про методы использования последовательностей в бизнес-логике.
The next presentation by Camille Islamov about the methods of using sequences and business logics. My name is Camille Islamov. Our company is specializing on development of their own small prototypes, so our focus of our multi-products is the quick development and getting stable results in short amount of time using minimal resources.
So today I will show you a couple of ideas how we used sequences for optimizing man hours. So today we are going to talk about some generic information on Postgres and sequences. We will talk about how we are using sequences data in stored procedures, and also I will tell you about our comprehensive indicators. So apart from sequences, we have alternatives way how to get IDs. So sequence itself allows the Postgres with the serial command to generate IDs, but you can also do it manually in by default field. Also, generated IDs can also be used. You can use other ways, and there are business tasks where you cannot use spaces, and instead you have to search for the previous maximum value. And there are other ways that you can use, but we're not going to go into detail. I can only tell you that it's the system time that up to a few nanoseconds. So typical sequence implemented in PostgreSQL are implemented globally in other popular DBMS. They are good because they have fewer overhead while calculating all this information. They link to transactions. They live in there in a world, and logs that we were listening to that we have covered today are the most the cheapest way how to deal with it. So apart from this, since it's a number, we can understand what objects came earlier or later. So it's better than just generated random numbers. So correspondingly, a lot of customers understand that sequence is like a basic situation, and they have some way how to work with this. They have EDS, they have dedicated sections for it. However, there are certain limitations that do not allow you or limit the way how you use sequences. The most frequent one is multi-master in a system when data go from different sources, and we are choosing a priority data. In this case, sequence can make you suffer, and you can use some limitations in that case. And this is how you can avoid conflicts or mergers of data that come from different multi-master systems. And also, when we generate a large amount of data, even cheap sequence will give you some overhead. And you can avoid it by generating your own IDs and by applying sequences in other cases, or maybe after data are generated. So here you can see standard implementation of sequence in DBMS, next value and current value. Current value is not available just like in Postgres and Postgres before you have previous value. What does Postgres give you in terms of sequence logic? So unlike Oracle, you can use functions in order to make a call. So in Oracle, for example, we say that we are calling a sequence through API. We are using nextval, but it's not like a function, it's like a piece of code. And in business logics, if you have to jump between sequences, this should be implemented by dynamic SQL. In this case, you can go to nextval, and this value can be random. Like we have one sequence here, we have another sequence here, and another very interesting functionality is setval. So in Oracle, it's not implemented. They do it different in a different way. In Postgres, this function is there. Any value can go to setval, and this value can be dynamic. It can be calculatable. It can be obtained out of the table, and the output will be a new value out of one data set, out of one column, one string. We can calculate it and we can get it. And this can be applied to business logics too, which is quite convenient. You can use nextval, and it's a very convenient feature when we have data generated out of different sources and we have to understand where we get this particular piece of information. Out of all three methods, what we can configure, the output after the call sequence will be like one string with one column. We can read it, we can store it, and we can use it later on. There are no... On-conflict is a very interesting feature too that you can use. What other use cases are there when it comes to alternative use to sequence? So it's nextval. It's calculated nextval, and when we fix it as a variable, it's not like a system ID. It's more like a business ID. And different types of component IDs for which we use the sequence as an additional performance gain. Talking about nextval, when we fix nextval value, the easiest way is to get nextval with the value and then reuse it in other situations. So you can use it like a virtual column. You can use it in a couple of inserts or SQL operations inside one transaction. And also, it is very good for CTE. What does this function, what does this value give you? Code becomes more readable. It will work faster, most likely, because it's just a value, and curval is just an additional functionality that can be different from the value itself, and it will have less overhead, obviously. If we are using value for business logics, you can get a number of advantages. First, it's a ready-to-use solution out of the box, and it will be like a unique number that you can easily find. There are certain cases when you are trying to get these sequences, you are trying to get this business ID, and this information should be reflected in the previous values, and you can easily see whether the transaction was committed or not, because we know that sequences live in their own universe. What else can sequence give you as a part of business logics? It can be used for cycling. You can define the size after which the sequence will just reset itself, and then the next sequence will start. It's very interesting when, for example, we are talking about financing periods. For example, every year the number of invoices resets, and this is the way how we can use sequences in order to get a new range of sequences starting from 0 or 1. When we use multi-master data from different sources, With the sequence and specific settings of steps, we can guarantee that data that we get from different sources will never conflict, they will never overlap, and we can guarantee it by setting the very first value. Then we define a set, like we have 3 multi-master, this step will be 3, and each next sequence will have with their own sequences. They will go fast, they will have the same advantages in their databases, but they will never overlap, they will never interfere, because they have all their own step. For example, in our system it works fine. It's Oracle, but still the logic is the same. You can, by doing so, you can easily understand from which instance you get this data. And data never conflicts, which is very good. It's very cheap, it's very convenient, it's actually free of charge, and it can help you while getting your data from different sources. Another very interesting tool is using sequence for ever-growing systems like billing systems. You can use one sequence for multiple business-critical entities. For example, we don't have serial in each table. We have one object sequence, and we put different entities, and we use this for the same ID. It's very convenient when it comes to different use cases. When, for example, we are looking for an object, and when we know just the number, but we don't know the source table. Even if you have dozens of thousands of tables, it's okay to use primary key. It's not very expensive. Another case is when you're using global journalism, global logging systems. For some business systems it can be critical. It's very good that in one log you have all data modifications. All you have to do is to localize this sequence and to define the object type, like a person and so on. And this is how you can guarantee not only end-to-end uniqueness of data and objects inside the system, but also it enables you some monitoring options. We can understand how fast our system was growing 1 hour ago, 1 day ago, and if we see a peak, we need to pay special attention to this. And this functionality is available while working with such sophisticated systems. Another way how you can use sequence, which grows, that is used for different tables, but not as a primary key as in the previous case. You can use it when you have to generate a business sequence from different entities. For example, if it's not connected with business logics, like for example in your feed, in your news feed, you sort events from different sources, but not by time, but by this sequence. It guarantees you, first of all, that you won't have to calculate some milliseconds. You have a very accurate instrument that can be used for each group of collected elements, and by using this second ID that will be unique. So different objects go in one sequence, and by using this sequence we can understand which object was created earlier, from what entities, what objects were generated, what is the dependencies between them, and what was the time of their creation. It can be used for sorting, and also this can be used to get this information about time. It's all about when we sort some information by using one criteria. It's like a link to this ID when it comes to different objects that are generated out of one sequence. It gives you a chance to log these groups. It allows you to log these groups and to separate them somehow out of business logics by forming these logs out of these groups. And also you can easily identify elements out of these groups just by performing a search using this second identifier. Another way how a sequence can be used to generate some IDs is to combine them with some useful data. For example, if you have to get readable IDs, when you take a look at the ID and the reader can understand to what business segment this element belongs to, you can form some blocks, informative text blocks, and you can make them unique just by concatenating sequences. And the options can be different. It can be like object, sub-object, sequence, or global prefix, just like a very easy text ID and then a sequence. Altogether, it makes the ID more readable, the overhead is small, and it generates a readable ID unlike U8. What it can give to you in certain systems, it makes the IDs more concise, they're more readable. You can define different roles by using this generated block that is clear for us, and the developer himself can define these rules. IDs are more compact because the tail of the sequence is short, and we ensure data uniqueness without very large UIDs, which have no value for us. Another way how we can use sequences in some systems is to combine different use cases. When we create a primary key, we not out of a number, not out of integer, but out of a decimal. And decimal has some functionality too, because the decimal consists of Unix timestamp, some seconds. So the number will be different every single second, and the integrity and the uniqueness when it comes to fractional numbers sometimes cannot be guaranteed. In this case, we can use sequences. We make a decision whether this system is capable to generate data per 1 second. If we have 1 million pieces of data, we will have this sequence, and we can just divide our sequence by this order. Like we have one sequence, we have order of 6, and we assume that the system will not grow faster than 1 million of data entities per second. So we calculate the sequence, we just divide, and then we plus a Unix timestamp, and we have like a composed unique ID that can be used as a primary key for the whole system, for all tables, and it will have the full array of advantages that you can use when it's just a sequence that is just a number. It's not just a sequence which is a number. This sequence has all this data, and it is accurate to 1 second, and by doing this, you will not have to use some system fields that can be used by trigger or by default value. And this comprehensive situation allows you to use this global logging system. You can look for the object by using its ID, so it populates your system with data, and it allows you to use the data types in a concise way. If it is a decimal, with a fixed value. It is very concise, and it gives you advantages partially from sequence, partially from global IDs, and it doesn't generate big text data that maybe will be indexed faster, but they will grow in size. So globally, if we take a look at all these use cases, I mean alternative sequences use, you can find a particular situation that will give you the most out of sequences, and you can use them in your particular situation. So you can use text-generated ID with a tail, or you can use decimals with integers, or you can use some global sequences for for multiple databases. So what sequence gives you? It's a you can optimize development time, especially when you use sequences in business situations when you don't have to care about integrity, where you can save resources on logging, so you don't have to log different objects. You can put everything into one big table, and then you can easily search for what you need. And also it allows you to deal with the local business tasks by minimizing development efforts. So that's it. If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer them. Thank you very much, Camille. Let's give a round of applause to our speaker. Are there any questions?
Скажите, пожалуйста.
Could you please tell how the sequence is set in the beginning of each second if we use a fractional number, where the whole part is the time tag and the fractional part is the sequence? There's just the cycle that is applied there. It's cycled for the order that we see fit in this current situation. In some object, it doesn't have to start with 0, but we know that at this very second, we are not going to overrun this whole cycle. So in one cycle, there could be a number of seconds, so 10 or 20 seconds. So for example, if the system pauses, and then the cycle goes on by itself. It's a sequence for a cycle. Now, of course, not all the data starts with 0. Some of them starts with more than a 0. But our task here is to get an identifier that would be guaranteed and have the information about the time at the same time, at the same data block. So as soon as we get the next entry, we are doing the increment. The incrementation is done by itself. Every time the Unix time com is being calculated, the sequence is added to it, and then it's shared to this order. And the sequence is living its own life. We're not referring to it. Any other questions? Could you please come there? Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask. The presentation was dedicated to the advantages of the sequence, and maybe in some cases you wouldn't recommend using it. Well, not that I wouldn't recommend using it. We had cases, we had situations when a large amount of data is generated. Sometimes it's easier just to generate it and then to deploy it without linking it to connecting it to anything, tying it to anything, or if the system is multi-master and this trick is not working with this guaranteed shift. So if it's not working there, then the sequence is going to live its own life locally with the standard applications, and we're not going to use it anyhow in any way. So these are the situations where you can do that, when there are a lot of sources and when you can't use the streaks to bypass it. Thank you. Otherwise, it's a useful tool. You said the sequence is generating int. What is the maximum number of figure of big int? And if my database is tens of thousands of tables and I'm doing upgrades a lot of times, so what will be the possibility if the overkill is going to happen and the roll down? What would sequence do if that's the case? From what I remember, there's serial 8, which is a bigger number. I have never looked past this. Even begin as a large number by itself. And, well, inadequate systems, at least the system that I worked with, it doesn't generate so many business situations. For us, sequence is a business identifier, not just you have a lot of noise or terabytes of data. That's not business data. Business data is something you can put your hands on, even if there are million subscribers, traffic, and every second you get something from them. Even if that's the case, Begin will not overflow. It should be something huge, something humongous, but that's not a business scenario. And at Postgres, there is a serial 8, then you can use that, which is much larger. Thank you. Could you pass the mic there? Thank you for your presentation. I apologize. Maybe my question would seem dumb because I joined you later. There is so-called unique identifier, unique lexicographically sorted identifier, so-called elites. I think that the situation when the database is sharded, especially elites, sequences, they are really not working there. So what are the advantages? As I said, sometimes when there is uncontrollable flow from a lot of sources, that's the lead which is generated by the application. And then it's a nice idea to use this. But when we wanted to base on sequences, then we used some tricks to do that. We created some shifted. If we knew the number of shards, then we allocated a shard, a gap, and a shift. Or if another trick here was so to use this kind of identifier. You can manage prefixes on the application side, and then the sequence would allow you to local uniqueness, and the global uniqueness is using the preferences of the application. Yes, it is a great tool, but it's not available to us because it doesn't really work information-wise, because it's just some generated text. Yes, it could depend on MAC address, some other blocks that are constant, permanent there, but still, that's a UID, and here we can fill it with the information that we need. That's not uniqueness for the sake of uniqueness. That's a functional uniqueness, and that's the same amount of data. Okay, I've heard you. Thank you. I just wanted to make it clear. I'm not talking about UID, but about ULID. Because it contains information about the date and about the time. You can get it from there, and it can be sorted. Honestly, I haven't seen it. So take it, give it a look. So it could be interesting for you. Do we have any more questions? So from what I see, we don't have any. So thank you very much for your presentation.